and welcome to another exciting Fantasy Fellowship Indie Spotlight Author Q&A. I'm Max, and joining me is Mark Timmony, author of Blood of the Spear, an exciting indie fantasy first in his The Eye of the Eternity series. Set 3,000 years after a great magical war has ended, leaving a continent broken, magical wonders destroyed, and whole great houses wiped out, hints of darkness have begun to return, and the brothers Kael and Darian discover they may be at the heart of a demon-filled prophecy as ancient evils stir once again. Mark, thanks for joining us. I hope I got the characters' names pronunciation right.
You did. Yes, perfect.
Good. Yeah, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So why don't we start off very generally and just kind of roll the clock back a bit. What were you doing before you got into writing, and what kind of put you onto this path?
Okay, well, I've wanted to be a writer since I picked up Dragons, Dragonlance, Dragons of Autumn Twilight back in the mid to late 80s. When I read that book, I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. This is the sort of things like I'd always liked like dragons and wizards and knights and stuff, and the few TV shows that I found at the time that had them. And this was the first time I realized you could actually get books about these things. So I hadn't like been introduced to Lord of the Rings or anything prior to that. And I've discovered this book, and that opened, my eyes to what's out there. And not long after I'd read that trilogy, I decided, or somehow something happened that I was like, I want to write this sort of thing. I want to write stories like this. So that's basically how I got into writing or reading, the reading of epic fantasy or science fiction, sword and sorcery stuff. That got me in the idea of writing. I worked in retail for a long time. I still do, kind of. I work for an online bookseller in Australia, Booktopia. I'm no longer in customer service, which is where I spent most of my time. I'm now in purchasing. I'm a purchasing coordinator there and deal with the ordering of books and things for customer orders and restock in our warehouse. But for 10 years, I worked in Sydney in a science fiction fantasy specialist bookstore called Galaxy Bookshop, which was really cool. The Galaxy had built itself on the fact that back in the day, you weren't able to get overseas titles, so titles from America that hadn't been picked up by a UK publisher. You couldn't get those locally in Australia, and we would import them. That was before Amazon became big and all that sort of stuff. So I worked there for a long time and got to meet, I would say, nearly all of the big Australian fantasy authors in that time.
Wow.
So Jennifer Fallon, Trudy Canavan, Karen Miller, Sarah Douglas, all those people basically had come through the store at some stage. So I get to talk to them about writing and how to, the process and things like that. And that just inspired me even more, although there were many, many years of procrastination before I actually got Blood of the Spear ready for publication.
Fair enough. And was Blood of the Spear the first book you wrote?
Yeah,
or were there other?
it was. Oh. Yeah, it has changed a lot since the initial draft. Yeah, I think when we first started, I was omniscient narration, and then we changed to type third person POV. A lot of the places that we started originally have changed. In fact, in the final draft, the first 10 chapters got cut in half, and I changed things around again. So there's been a lot of iterations of that book before it finally got published. And maybe I should have just gone, you know what, that was my practice run, I'm going to go and write something else. But I'd had this idea for the Eye of Eternity series in my head for a very long time, and I wasn't prepared to let it go. It was like, no, this is the story I want to write. This is what I want to get out there. So we just worked, and I sent it to development editors a number of times and took feedback and changed stuff on that. Because of my time at Galaxy, I got to know editors at publishing companies, specifically Stephanie Smith, who was basically the founding Australian editor of Harper Voyager in Australia, and the one who discovered Sarah Douglas and Trudy Canavan and Jennifer Fallon, people like that. And she read it for me and she gave me feedback, which was amazing. And yeah, I think there were 7 or 8 drafts before I finally got to the finished product that is out today. But it's all been a learning curve. It's still not perfect. I don't know that it ever would be. As that saying that a writer's never finished, it just gets to the point where someone takes it away from you and says that's enough. Put it out there.
So how long was that between starting with the first draft and what we're reading now?
I finished the first draft in 2010, I think, and put it away for a number of years. I probably should have started writing something else when I'd done that, change just for something different, but I didn't. I put it away for about 2 or 3 years, and then I picked it up again and started going through and rereading it and changing sentences and moving words around. I kind of, at that stage, didn't have much of an idea of the process of what you do next as a writer. I hadn't had any.
Because this came out 2021, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I hadn't had any formal education, like a university for creative writing or anything like that. I was just doing this as a reader and a lover of reading, thinking, oh, I know how to structure a story. I know about, how to make a character great and fun. And I learnt a lot hiring. So one of my first editors, Abigail Nathan, is who's a good friend, is a freelance editor who does a lot of work for Harper and Gollancz and places like that. And she, did assessments on the manuscript for me and gave me lots of feedback and examples of what to do and how to change things and how to tighten structure and prose. And so I learnt by working with editors on what to do and how to do things or how to change things up in the story. So those, finish the book, give it to the editor, get an assessment and feedback, then go and work on the feedback there. That was all part of my process in terms of learning what to do and what to do in the stages of editing or drafting a manuscript. And then I worked with my final editor, AJ Spedding, and that's where we were like, yep, let's cut the first 10 chapters, and we cut them in half, basically. So that was a lot of rearranging of stuff. It's really weird because every now and then I was so used to, so familiar with how the book had originally started, that sometimes I go back to it, or in the process of checking edits, I all of a sudden panic that I've forgotten to put something that was particularly important to my mind in the original one in the new version. And I have. It's just in a different spot because it was like, how do I keep all this important information in? And it was, I reworked it. So I'm currently working on an audio book of The Blood of the Spear. So I've been working through the manuscript with the narrator. I've been coming across that a little bit, and I'm like, oh no, that got missed. And then I'm like, oh no, it didn't. It's here. Okay.
I mean, I think it benefited because the first 10% of the book is very snappy. Like it really just goes right into the tale.
It wasn't originally, and I was told it was boring. So it was like, right, that's the beginning of the book, and you don't want people to put it down. So let's change it.
No, it starts well. You have, the prologue, kind of an eerie prologue, and then tiny bit of like world building, and then just straight into the trials, like bit of excitement, and a bit more world building, and then main story.
Yeah.
It
So
works well.
thank you. That chapter 1 was new. That was completely new in the final draft. I had never had Kyle's trial on page. It was always referred to as having happened before the book started. And so I was like, right, so how do
Oh.
we, what do I do here? And then I was thinking about character development and how to make Kyle a bit more dynamic. So I was like, all right, let's do this trial. Let's put it in. So that was a new chapter in the final draft of the book.
Yeah, the trial was good.
Thank you.
So we have a few questions from
Yep.
some of our members, because we have been buddy reading this over the last month, and our members
Mhm.
have enjoyed it. So while we're on the subject of publishing, some of them were asking about how you found like perceptions about indie books and indie publishing, because I know it's shifted quite a lot in recent years. Indie publishing has
Yeah.
become much bigger, but at least in the past there were quite negative connotations
Yeah.
around it. And
100%.
how have you found this? Did you try traditional publishing as
Yep.
well, or?
I did. So one of the reasons I chose to go indie was that I had spent like I'd finished the first draft in 2010, and then by 2020, when I'd finished my final draft, um, yeah, I like it had been a decade, right? It'd been longer. It'd been in my head since the 90s, this story. Um, and I was like, right, so I'm going to send it out to some agents. And I sent it out to some agents, and I actually got feedback from, I sent it out to three of the agents, three agents, and I got feedback from two of them saying, thanks for sending it through. They liked it, but it's not what they were looking for. And the third agent I didn't hear anything back from. It's par for the course. And it occurred to me that I would have to wait who knows how long trying to find an agent that connected with what I had written. And then I'd have to wait again for that agent to find a publisher who also connected with what I'd written. And then wait for them to get into their schedule for publishing if I was lucky enough that they would pick it up.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how long that was going to be. So as the perception of indie publishing had been changing, and particularly in the science fiction fantasy community, the community that's growing around indie authors, and the willingness to jump in and try them and give them a go, and to support them if they're a writer that they enjoy. And Mark Lawrence's Spiffbo, I
Yeah.
was like, I decided I would publish it myself and enter the self-publishing fantasy blog off, and I got into the semifinals. So yeah, I figured that I'd go that route, and like, how about I build myself an audience, get my book out there, get readers, see what I can do. I am unfortunately a slow writer. I wish it wasn't the case, but maybe that's changing in a method I'm currently finding as I write book 2. I'm tending to write it a little bit faster than I was expecting, which is good. And then in the future, I've got lots of other ideas for different stories and different potential series that I want to try. And who knows, maybe another 1 or 2 series in the future, I might go, you know what, I'm going to try and find an agent this time again. And maybe this time with, some readers behind me, people who are waiting to read the next book I put out, it might be that little bit easier, because I know publishers are very much, they like to know that there are people waiting for for a book to come out. And
Yes.
also these days, authors have to do a lot of the PR stuff themselves. We have to get on Twitter and get the word out there and find bloggers who want to read our books. And publishers have marketing companies, and they do, to a degree, have like regular bloggers who are waiting for books from them, and they'll read them and review them. But outside of that, the author needs to do it. And also, as a new author or as an author for a publishing company, you basically have about 4 weeks of shelf life for if in terms of marketing with the publisher, to get out there and find that audience and get your name known. And if it's not been picked up within those 4 weeks, well, they're on to the next thing that comes out in the next month, and you're just left to your own devices to try and keep it going. Some publishers might be a little bit different, but that's generally how it works, unless you somehow hit a nerve with the reading market and they're like talking you up and the sales are going constantly, in which case the publishers will go, oh, this is, we need to keep working on this because it's doing something. Otherwise, it's like, right, here's our next month's lot of books coming out. Focus on them now.
How many books are you planning for The Eye of Eternity, do you think?
So main series is planned for 7. So wow. I definitely need to get myself right. And possibly, so I've got 1 novella already, Starbinder. Got that out here.
Very nice.
Yeah, and possibly a sequel to Starbinder, a standalone novel length sequel. And I'm also thinking at the moment that there might be a novella between books 2 and 3, because there's a whole introduction of another faction that's going to come into book 3 that might need to be introduced prior, or could do with being introduced prior, but isn't going to fit into book 2. So maybe I don't know about that, but I'm not 100% sure about that, but definitely 7 main books in the series.
Yeah. So we had a few people comment on the creatures that inhabit the world you've created, and how creepy some people find some of them. And a comment was made about how you live in Australia, and so like, oh, that makes sense then. So were any of the creatures kind of inspired by Australian wildlife?
I don't understand that comment at all. Australia does not have scary wildlife. What are you talking about? It has big spiders, but it's fine. No, actually, I can't say that it was. I'm a big reader and have been for years of science fiction, of fantasy. And I play a lot of World of Warcraft. I get ideas from the things that I read, the games that I play, and then working them into the magic system that I have for the Eye of Eternity, and how would it work and how would it relate? Like, it's all got to be connected. It's kind of got to be organic. So I can take this idea here, and then working it into the world changes it somehow to make it fit the story I'm telling, or the world that I'm building. So I start off with a seed, and then as the story progresses, that grows and morphs into something else. And I would say it's more a case I've been influenced by mythology and fantasy novels and computer games more so than the Australian wildlife.
So when you were planning for Blood at the Spear, was there like any of these books, films, TV shows, games that were particular inspiration for kind of the world or setting that you created? Because it's very detailed. You've got a lot of history there. What was the kind of the main seed for it, if you will?
So the main seed was probably the Wheel of Time. That is one of my most favorite ever series. For all that I can say, the middle books are really slow and drag on, and maybe Jordan does spend a bit too much time detailing dresses and things like that. It's kind of like, it still is my favorite series, and it was less the world and more the story or type of story that he told that was like, it basically, I get inspired by that type of stuff, and it's like I want to do that. That's what I want to, to create something that makes people feel the same kind of like
Mm.
the depth of world and epicness in story that I got from him. And then, reading that, I remember reading The Eye of the World, probably discovered it about 10 months after it first came out back in 1990. Um, and then I was looking for other books that were like it. So obviously I'd read all the Terry Brooks, the Shannara stuff, and the
Mm.
Magician by Feist, David Eddings. Um, I never got into Lord of the Rings. I somehow missed the boat with all of that. The movies are
Oh.
great, but I just can't do Tolkien's writing. I appreciate his world building, but just never worked for me. So I got all these modern authors that had been inspired by Tolkien. So it's, a
Mm.
degree of separation, I guess. So I went looking for that type of stuff, and then I came across things like Melanie Rawn and the Sunrunner, or the Dragon Prince series, and Janny Wirtz and the Wars of Light and Shadow, which finishing the last book, so hopefully out next year. I can't wait. And things, books of that nature, and then obviously Malazan as well. Um, and I've been told I've been told Blood of the Spear reads like Eye of the World written by Stephen Erickson. So, so I don't know, maybe. But rereading some of Janny's stuff, particularly her Cycle of Fire trilogy, I was like,
Mm.
oh, I think I got some ideas from this this trilogy. Um, so it's kind of been all over the place, but the original spark was definitely the Wheel of Time,
Mm.
and there was a time that I was a little concerned it was too much Wheel of Time. But then as I was progressing with the rewrites and the world building, and things would start to change, and the reason and motivation behind things differed,
Mm.
and it's split off into its own thing. So it was again that whole idea of taking a seed and letting it grow in different soil and seeing what comes from that.
Mm.
But I definitely draw inspiration from other writers. They inspire me all the time. Um,
Yeah.
they, they give me sparks of ideas for stories, or, even authors who will write something that I'm not enjoying, that I'm really frustrated with how the story's going, and it's like, you start getting angry and go, no, this should happen, and then that would happen, and it's like, oh, hold on, here's a whole story idea, Mark. So let's
Yeah.
make a note.
Yeah, I did. I did get Wheel of Time vibes from the
Yeah.
book. Not hugely. The main bit was when what is about 2/3 of the way through, when they arrive in the city and they see
Mhm.
the tower, the big
The Crystal
impossibly
Spire.
tall, yeah,
Yeah.
impossibly tall, like
Yeah.
crystal white spire. I was like, this seems
Yeah.
very White
Okay,
Tower.
yeah. Yeah, sure. Totally.
Um,
And in fact, a reread of Wheel of Time made me completely redo my whole idea of the magic users in the Seralis, because
oh,
I
really?
wanted to create a magic user that kind of had the same gravitas as the Aes Sedai do.
Hmm.
Um, And the Crystal Spire in Serjat is a chapter house of the Sorella. So their main base of operations is the state city of Asolier and the Palace of the Eye of Eternity. Um, and that's somewhere you visit in book two. Um, but the first thing, the Crystal Spire is actually a link back to the ancients that predate human occupation upon the world of Sobia, or human
Hmm.
arrival on that world. So there's a whole hinted at that humans aren't native to this world, and they're not. Um, and that crystal spire is left over from the Siren and the Summoners, who were part of the war 3,000 years before the start of the book, and the ancients that predated them. So yeah, it was yeah, sure, I
Yeah,
can see the White
you got quite
Tower,
a lot
but
of.
yeah.
Yeah, that was the only really point that it really stood out for me. The rest, I was like, oh, you can see where it's been inspired that bit. You're mentioning about the throwback, the history, the Crystal Tower is a leftover of the arrivals and the wars. So how much? Because you hint a lot in the book at this war 3,000 years ago, these
Yep.
trapped evil entities, ancient houses that have been lost,
Yep.
supposedly ancient weapons that resurface. How much of the history do you have planned and mapped out that you haven't like shared with
Most of
us?
it, I guess, but not in great detail. It's like doing a rough outline. So it would be
Okay.
a rough timeline of what's happened and points, just ideas. So I know the main players of the War of the Summoners. I know why it happened, and what the effects were. Um, so originally, and this is something that
Mm,
will probably be, it's one of those weird things because a lot of what my editors were calling info dumping got taken out of book one. So I can't remember, is this something, did I mention it briefly in book one or have I taken it out now? But we'll go over it again in book two. The summoners built a, so in book one, you don't get a lot of information on how the magic system's actually working, right? So it comes across a little bit like a soft
mm,
magic system in that regard. It is very much a hard magic system. They're hard and fast rules. And you will get more of that in book two from the POV of two characters specifically, as they go through their own journey and learning different aspects of it. Um, so I knew all the stuff with the summoners, and the summoners used to be like the rulers or heads or leaders of humanity, and there were houses underneath the principal summoners or siren. And during the War of the Summoners, all the siren were basically wiped out, and the houses underneath them kind of fell apart too. Some people managed to, or some of their descendants kept power in one way or another. But for about 500 or so years after the end of the War of the Summoners, everything was devastated, and things were thrown into the Dark Ages until the Var rose, and the Solivar and the Hylavar, and they started to um, build cities again and create refuges for humankind, and um, groups of warriors were able to form and take care of the demons that were still roaming the land as a leftover from the war.
mhm.
Um, and that's when human history kind of restarts on Sobia and starts building itself up again. And the whole idea that they don't want another war that will destroy the world, so they will basically execute anyone who is either born with the mark of the summoner on their hand or on whom it appears later in life. There's like no ifs or buts about it. They're just not, those people aren't allowed to live. They get killed. So some of them try to hide, and there are things in the society where they have to present the back of their right hand to
Yeah,
show that there is no mark on it. And
yeah,
some,
that's at the very start.
yeah.
Well,
So
and
some,
one of the other characters are stopped by the guards they're
yeah,
coming through the forest, and they're told, "Show your hands."
yeah, Sim, and he's like, you know who I am. It's like
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily. There are some people who were born with it, and there are some people upon whom it appears later.
Mm.
The ability develops naturally. Um, so that mark will appear on anyone who can summon, um, summon demons or elementals. Um, and some of the cultures or the realms are more vigilant in their um, in the habit or rules of presenting when you enter a city, or when you meet a new person, or when you meet your friends, show that you're not marked or tainted, as it were. And it just so happens that Aldania, where the story begins, the Aldanians are very militant in requesting that information, but the borderland wilds that edge the eastern border of Aldania, and between them and the Deadlands, while they fight demons all the time, they're a little bit more relaxed. So when Sim comes across this guy who's like, "Show me your hand," he's like, "What are you talking about? It's like, we don't do that out here. It's fine."
So you're mentioning all these places, and I can't remember what interview it was. You mentioned in another interview that you like to start off with a map when you're writing.
Yes.
So how detailed a map is it? Just a rough sketch, and then you start building the story? Oh,
That's like the
huh.
original map. Okay, so detailed.
Right.
Yeah, it was pretty detailed. Well, that's one of the things I love about fantasy. I love the maps, right? So when I was like
And sorry,
building
how
world,
much of that map did you use in book one?
less than
Like of
10% of it.
you've done a detailed
Yeah,
like it looks
yeah,
like two or one large like
yeah.
U-shaped continent.
Yeah.
Like how much of that was actually in book one?
Less than 10%, probably.
Wow.
So yeah, part of my world building process is that I love fantasy. Well, I love fantasy. I love fantasy maps. So when I started world building, it's like, well, I need to know what I'm talking about. I need to visualize what this land mass looks like, and where are the mountains, and where are the rivers, and where are the different kingdoms. And so eventually, it turned into what I just showed you. Originally, it started off well, and it was prior to the war. It was one continent, and the war kind of broke that into two. There are other continents on this planet. We're just focusing on Athme in this story. Um, and yeah, that leads to my world building. So it's like, all right, let's have, what's this kingdom over here? That will be maybe a little bit like, let's say France. This one over here, it's a desert. Okay, cool. So, this is a bit Egyptian maybe, and then from those sparks or seeds, I'll start growing and making it, my own.
Yeah.
And knowing how everything interacts, or is interwoven, will then play on each country, each realm, because we don't call them kingdoms, they're realms. Each the development of each one, and the history, and what's gone on there. And I like to fill maps. I kind of look at maps that are just like, oh yeah, there's this kingdom, and here's a capital city, and there's this one, and here's another one. It's like, well, what about all the other cities and towns and villages and stuff? It's like, these worlds are usually full of places. So I did that as best I can. I actually have only noted, it's a very large place, and I've only noted the capital cities and other minor cities around. I haven't noted towns and villages as such on the map. But and once that happens, there's becomes this density of information in my head, or on my notes, of, well, how does it all interact? And that's then the stage that you put the story on. So when your characters are in there, there's like, you try and bring a vibrancy, a weightiness to what's going on. It makes it feel like this is a lived in place. And that's just my process. Every writer's different, and some writers don't feel the need to do that at all. I think I procrastinated a lot with my world building before I came across the actual story I wanted to tell. And part of my procrastination was building this world.
Well, I mean, you built it very well, and I quite liked
Thank you.
a lot of the little things. I liked a lot of the traditions and stuff that were added in.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so yeah, so one of them was the tradition of hedge right,
Mm.
to be granted entry into the like
The
an
Sorellis?
unofficial way to get into the Crystal Tower. It felt
Yeah.
without wishing to do too many comparisons of your book to other works, it
Mhm.
felt very much like a nanny or a granny og way of
Okay.
doing things from Discworld, like the
Yeah.
alternative little route around.
Yeah.
Do you have? Are there going to be more of these kind of old, almost forgotten traditions, or was this kind of just it served a purpose and you needed some way for, without wishing to give away too much for people that haven't
Well,
finished
it,
this
it is
particular character to progress?
yeah, it was a little bit of that. But it was also linked in that there are there are many different traditions of magic users. The Siren, the summoners, were the height of that in terms of power and their ability to actually um, uh, manipulate reality. Um, the Sorallis were trained by the summoners, but don't have the same ability the summoners had to summon demons or elementals and connect with them. So they can't quite see or affect reality the same way the summoners were able to. But with the summoner's absence, the Sorallis are the most powerful magic users around. Then there are witches or the keepers, and they have covens, and they use. So it's the basis of this magic is from the light of the eye, or Asai. It's known as this power that they use to create effects, and the summoners could view the language of creation. So they would see, they could look at a tree and basically see energetic runes that created that tree, and then they could manipulate those runes and change the tree. So when magic is used by the summoners or the Sorallis, they use Assyric, High Assyric, which is the language of creation. Um, the Siren could see it naturally. The Sorallis can't see the runes, but taught them they can use them to create an effect that they want. The keepers, or the witches, who are more prevalent in the smaller towns and areas, use a reflection of the light of the eye to create an effect. So it's not as powerful or as um, domineering as direct use of High Assyric is. And they're kind of looked down on as second class welders of magic, and they don't have a traditional structure that is behind the Sorallis. So when the War of the Summoners ended, and all the summoners were gone, and the Sorallis were moving themselves into that vacuum of power, which they weren't quite as successful in taking up as the summoners had. There was an arrangement made with keepers that any of them who wanted to come and join the Sorallis, because they were able to visualize or interact with the Psi, it's meant that they could learn the Sorallis type of magic. They were given the opportunity, the ability to turn up at one of these chapter houses and say, "Hey, I'm a keeper or an apprentice of a keeper, and I claim hedge right to come and join you." And so
Mhm.
that's where that came for this particular story and why it was used. And there are lots of other um, traditions and orders in the military orders that have things like that as well that may turn up. Um, Probably
Sure.
not like a hedge right type thing, but have their own traditions and
Mhm.
I think that type of thing is I love that sort of stuff. It's like really interesting, and it makes it feel the world feel lived in, and
Yeah, it
you know,
adds just that little something
yeah,
extra, as well as,
yeah,
driving the plot forward a bit.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's it's part of the flavor of it, and
Hmm.
just makes it a little bit, I think, a little bit more than just you know this is going to happen because of X, because it's convenient, although it is.
Speaking of convenient,
Mhm.
there's a point, yeah, about a quarter of the way through where the characters essentially like fast travel through through an ancient magic system.
Yeah,
Um, was this because you kind of wanted to avoid the long trek across like the mountains chapters, or
across the
was it
Deadlands. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So
you just kind of realized they
one
needed to be quite far away, and you didn't
yeah,
want to have that in
one of
between?
my editors was like, "Oh my god, these chapters of travel are really boring. Like, I don't want people to say, 'Oh my god, is that the book where they travel forever on this river?'" And I was like, it's not boring. There's lots of stuff happens. But I was like, all right, well, I needed to cut words as well for this book,
Mm,
or I wanted to cut words. And you get really close to a story that sometimes it is more difficult for the writer to see where there may be an issue than it
yeah.
is for someone outside as an editor or a beta reader come along and say, "Oh, that doesn't really work. It doesn't fit. It doesn't feel right." So I had used I was going to call them the ways because it's like Robert Jordan's the way system. They actually used ley lines, and that was something that was left over from travel from the before the Sundering happened.
Mm. Yeah,
And
it's called the White Road.
the White
Is it?
Road, yeah,
Yeah.
the Renamor
Mm,
in Assyric, um, and they utilize ley lines basically to create these points of faster travel, and it was originally something that the summoners had to connect all the vast empires
mm,
or cities, but the distances between cities and stuff. It was originally used to take our friends from to get them away from people chasing them
yeah.
to another citadel. And then they came out from that citadel and would get on a boat, and they went through the Deadlands. And so I was like, well, I need to cut words. So we cut the first 10 chapters down to 5, and we changed that around. And I was like, well, I've got the White Road already. What if instead of it letting them out there, it actually takes them across the Deadlands?
Mm,
Um, so I decided that I would use it for that, and cut a couple of chapters out of travel that was apparently boring, and take some of the other stuff that was more interesting and whack it in there as well.
mm,
Um, and then it then connected as well with the master of the tower, the master of the swamp, the tower there, and who that person is, and what his influence in actually activating that ley line, that White Road for them, because
mm,
these are notoriously hard to find in the modern setting of the story. And when they are found, they can basically lead people to their death rather than out. So they're marked on maps. Some of them are, but other areas it's kind of like we don't know it's here, or we don't know how to get into it if it's there, or if we do get into it, how do we get out?
mm.
Um, so it's not a huge point of travel, but it was like, okay, there was absolutely some convenience in using that, but I thought it fit as well. And I tried to keep the more interesting action oriented parts of what happened originally in their journey in the story.
And let's just go back to the magic system just briefly, because There was just a question regarding one of the characters. I might just put a disclaimer here for anyone that is currently reading the book or you're planning on reading. They might want to skip this question. So I'll just leave a moment in case want to pop up what time to skip to on the screen.
Okay.
So when they reach the Crystal Tower, Darian is tested to see what discipline he'll fit into within wielding the Asai. And I mean, clearly he's very powerful, and they call him a catalyst. So why is he not accepted? Is it because he doesn't have a clear discipline, and the magic will just he'll just amplify the magic out of him?
Yeah. So the Suralis are very hidebound with tradition, and they are in some degree, in some ways, have blinders on and have also forgotten a lot of stuff. So the whole idea is that they take these sky stones and you channel a Asai through them, and it will turn into the color that connects, that represents the sphere of magic that you're attuned to most closely. And it's almost like, except it's got nothing to do with the time of birth or your birth, but it's a bit like a star sign. You're born on this date, so you're a Gemini. These people are born specifically, not because of any particular time of the month or year, but they have a natural affinity with a particular element. So the magic system is broken into 5: earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. And these colors will reflect which element that you're most closely aligned with. And therefore, once you become a Suralis proper and start learning in more depth the art of the Suralis, you will learn it under, you'll specifically learn for that element. When Darian did his,
you can't wield the other elements then? You just are bound to one?
That's what the Suralis believe.
Right. Okay.
That's what they believe. And so they see that anybody who, so when Darian did his test and their stone was multicolored like an opal, it was like, oh, well, you can't learn any of them, but you can channel. So, or channel. That's a Robert Jordan thing. It's wield. We wield Asai. You can wield Asai, and you can wield the power and assist hire Suralis in experiments and whatever. So we'll take you as a catalyst. Catalysts are very rare. We don't get them a lot. We want you as this. But like, that's not what he wanted. And one of the notes, in fact, and again, this is another thing. I leave it in the first part of the book, or didn't I? There is a reason, obviously, that his affinity isn't to a particular sphere. And he demonstrates an ability later that Suralis wouldn't have when he opens the door to the Dreamhold, because Suralis cannot see the runes of Asai when they are inert.
Okay.
But these runes were inert, and he happened to see one. So there's a thing in there for you if you've read the book and want to get an idea of where Darian's going. But yeah, there's a thing for that.
Are you expecting his there's a few like dark turns with some of the characters? Are you expecting to ramp that up a lot in book 2, or is it going to be a gradual?
It's probably, Darian has a dark journey ahead of him. Absolutely. The same way that Kyle has one that he needs to grow up in. So he's very idealistic.
Yeah.
But Darian, yeah, definitely goes dark. His journey is, yeah, a dark one. Book 2, it ramps up. I think it's a gradual ramp, but we're well on the way. It's already started, obviously, towards the end of
Yeah.
book 1. Yeah, and by the end of book 2, it's like, whoa, okay, so yeah. We don't really start exploring that until book 3. Yeah, but
Fair.
the stuff that happens isn't the best, isn't the nicest.
As one of our members said, like the characters frequently get kind of the short end
Mhm,
of the stick in this book.
mhm.
So I guess we can expect that's not gonna change anytime soon.
No, it's that whole thing of like what a writer has to do with characters is you chase them up a tree and then you throw rocks at them. It's never meant to be easy. It's kind of like you've got to. I would love it to be easy. I just want to tell the story right. It would be great. Sometimes it infuriates me in books where I can see this is happening. It's like, oh, why did the character do that? Now this is going to happen, or this, it's like, but that is part of the fun as well in some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they do get the short end of the stick. Life also doesn't always go the way you plan, right? Things happen. And
Mm.
it's how you deal with them that defines you, or how you respond to them that um, determines the experience you're going to have. So you kind of need to think, as a writer, I guess you need to think about those types of things as well. It's like, what makes this character interesting? Just having everything go their way on a page is like, boring, or there's no growth here, of which I've been accused of. But there's stuff that changed and stuff happens, and
Mm.
you know, um, that was one of the things that me and my editors looked at closely, was character growth and development. So I felt that I was on the right track, but more of that will happen in the future too, in future books. But like when I started Starbinder, it was based on the original prologue of of Blood of the Spear,
Oh.
and I cut that prologue and decided to bring it forward and make it more. Well, the prologue we ended up with was one that was also a new prologue, newly written before I wrote the trial, um, and when I was rewriting it, because it was written many years ago and it needed to be adjusted and brought into line with the changes in the law that had now come into place in the world, and also was originally omniscient narration. I had to change all of that as well. Um, I needed to do do stuff to make the character interesting. It's like how the character deals with unusual circumstances or situations
Mm.
is how readers will connect with people, and it's like, oh yeah, that's good, do that, that's really good, and like, oh, I can't believe this is happening, how are you going to get out of it, sort of stuff. And I want to find out what happens next. So yeah, I think, yeah, it's that whole chase them up a tree and throw rocks at them, and then they have to work out how they're going to get down without. So
Um,
I
so
hope it's
you
not
mentioned, yeah, your
yeah.
so you mentioned your novella there.
Mhm.
Uh, would you recommend for people that are going to come to this for the first time, read the novella first, or is it better to read Blood of the Spear and then you can read the novella and be like, oh, this is what they
There
talk
are
about?
Easter eggs in it for people who have already read book 1. You can
Okay.
read it without having read book 1 perfectly well. It's I feel, a self-contained little story. It kind of ends with like, okay, so these are the things that's going to happen in the future, or like for more. But if you've read book 1 and you go and read it, you get more of an insight to a character in the first book, and then you also pick up a little some Easter eggs about, well, the another faction of magic users in there. So it's entirely, and if you've not read The Blood of the Spear, and it's a big book and you're not sure you want to wade into it, you can sign up to my newsletter and get the ebook for free of Starbinder, and give that a go and see if you like it or like my writing. And if you do, you can go and try Blood of the Spear. Or if you don't want to sign up to a newsletter, you can get it for 99 cents on Amazon. So, yeah.
Fair.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's all the questions. Thanks very much for chatting with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Not at all. Yeah, I really enjoyed Blood of the Spear. I hope anyone that read it either independently of Fantasy Fellowship or as part of our indie buddy read enjoyed it as well. So yeah, if you've enjoyed this interview and you want to know more about Mark and his work, you can find him on his website, marktimmony.com, or on Twitter and Instagram, where he's just at marktimmony.
Yep.
His books are available. Probably order them through any bookshop or order them online. If you're in the UK and you want a nice signed edition, go to The Broken Binding, or in the US, go to Silverstone's Books. This has been another Fantasy Fellowship Q&A. If you want to see more of our Q&As, you can find us on YouTube, where we are Fantasy Fellowship. You can follow us on Twitter, where we are @FanFellowship, on Instagram, where we're at fantasy_fellowship, or you can find links to all of these, our events and more on our website, fantasy-fellowship.co.uk, where we also have links to our merch, to our upcoming events. So Mark, thanks again very much for joining us. I really enjoyed this chat. Hope you did too.
Thank you, Max. So did I. It was a great time.